What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Warriors HQ podcast. Dieter Kurtenbach, Wes Goldberg, breaking down all things Golden State Warriors. But first, this week, we got to break down the LA Clippers because that's just an epic collapse. It sucks to lose when you're up 3-1 in a series, and it stinks even more when you don't actually have a championship to go off of with all that arrogance that they were carrying into that series. Wes, just first and foremost, Clippers are frauds, right? Total frauds.
I've always been doubtful of the Clippers just because I thought that their depth was overrated. I wasn't convinced that Paul George would show up in the playoffs because he routinely has not. I wasn't convinced that guys like who were supposed to be their depth, like Lou Williams, would show up in the playoffs because he historically has not. And that came to fruition, right, against Denver, which may be the deepest team left in the playoffs, certainly in the Western Conference. And look, I think what happened there was you got a team that kind of coasted through the regular season, that tried to coast through the playoffs for some reason, and tried to turn it on when they wanted to turn it on, and then simply could not turn it on against a really good and understandably underrated Denver Nuggets team. And that was what stood out to me. And I think now you've really got to question. Look, I think the guys who didn't show up, that we expected not to show up, didn't show up. But you expected Kawhi Leonard to show up, and he didn't. And I think now he takes you don't want to base everything right off of a one series, sample size, but you can't give him the title of best player in the league anymore. You simply can't. Not with the way that he showed up. And you reserve much more judgment for guys like LeBron James and Steph Curry over the years. And I think Kawhi Leonard is going to start seeing some of that now.
Listen, I don't think it was necessarily Kawhi's fault that the team lost that 3-1 lead, but he didn't do anything to help. He went scoreless in the fourth quarter, if I remember correctly, as did Paul George. But that's Paul George's MO, right? And if he's your second best player, it's hard for me to see you advancing. Now, listen, I am all about wings. But if you only have wings and you got no, breast of the chicken, you don't have a chicken. Like, you don't have a championship. And you can tell I've been barbecuing lately.
I could tell. I actually really like that analogy. That's really good. Nikola Jokic is a chicken breast for sure.
Oh yeah. There's a lot going on there. Credit to the Nuggets. Listen, I know there's a lot of folks out there who are doing the whole receipt thing. The Clippers were at one point minus 10,000 to win this series. Like, Las Vegas doesn't set those odds unless they feel good about something. You're up 3-1. You had chances in all three of those games to finish off the Denver Nuggets, and you couldn't do it. Team didn't have heart. Team didn't have any soul. No. And Kawhi Leonard is not going to be that rah-rah guy. And Paul George, I don't want to make light of mental health things, but he was in his own head the entire series, and he's never been a good playoff performer. This is a team that tried to do it the easy way. And it's so ironic that their entire marketing platform this season was, we're going to do it the hard way. Everything is about grit and grind and all that. That was the old Clippers. That was the Clippers that played the Warriors in the first round last year. That was the Clippers that didn't have the superstar and got it done through a strength in numbers sort of a thing. When you add two superstars, those guys now get to dictate the culture. Kawhi Leonard doesn't dictate any culture. He doesn't. This is neither a good nor a bad thing. He's just not a culture builder. And Paul George thinks more highly of himself than he actually deserves to think of himself. That's just the blunt truth of it. He thinks he's a better player than he is. He is a very good player. Don't get me wrong.
He gave himself the nickname Playoff P before he's ever done anything in the playoffs, and still has.
Tells you a lot about that guy, that he's giving himself, one, a nickname, and two, a nickname that is totally inappropriate. So that team lost any sort of culture that it did have that might have been positive. Doc Rivers, I am angry at myself for allowing myself to be swayed by public perception. Doc Rivers is one of those hills that I was willing to die on years and years and years ago, up until last year, which was that he's just not a good X's and O's coach. And I know that is a trope in certain places when it comes to, the white guys are good X's and O's coach and the black guys aren't. I can go through a list of black coaches that are outstanding X's and O's guys. Doc Rivers is a culture builder. That's his deal. And there's a lot of places where that sort of a skill is very well needed. One of those places is the Los Angeles Clippers. And look at what that provided. He got outcoached routinely throughout this postseason. They load managed all year and then couldn't get through a game 7. So that worked out for everybody. Great management there. I was wrong. I thought that maybe he had turned a corner. I was just flat out wrong. I gave Doc Rivers too much credit.
He's always been an X's and O's guy, no doubt. But or he's never been an X's and O's guy, I should say. He's been a culture builder, and you should give him a lot of credit. He is a stars coach, and that is such a valuable thing, and it's such a hard thing to do in this league, to be able to manage and coach stars. And so that's where it is. But then his lead assistant in Boston, right, when he was coaching guys like Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett.
X's and O's guys. Unbelievable X's and O's.
We're talking about guys like Tom Thibodeau, who is maybe the opposite, like not a culture builder. And people like to think he is because he's got like this raspy voice and he's like tough as nails. But it's like, no, he's not a culture builder. But he's a great X's and O's guy for sure.
One of the best.
And one of the best. He was responsible for half a decade worth of NBA defense. But Ty Lue now is Doc's lead assistant. He's a culture guy. He's a culture guy, and you got to give him credit for doing what he did in Cleveland. But and look, he made adjustments that Doc Rivers didn't make. I think with Ty Lue in Cleveland was able to make lineup adjustments that Doc Rivers was just stubborn to make, and he should have made. And I actually think that the Clippers in this series would have been better off with Ty Lue leading things than Doc Rivers. But I'm not ready to go all the way into Doc Rivers is a bad coach area, but he definitely screwed the pooch here in this
series. I'm not a bad coach. I'm just saying that he was not an asset to the Los Angeles Clippers in that be the one time when you would need him to be an asset. Going beyond that, I mean, it's hard to blame him necessarily for not being able to make adjustments because he didn't know what his team was. And this is what the regular season is for. I know that we poo-poo the regular season, but honestly, I think the best thing that ever happened to the NBA is the Clippers going out because it told everyone two things. One, you can't just insert talent, win championship. It's way more complicated than that. You can look in places like Golden State and Cleveland and currently with the Lakers, you can say, oh, just get talent and play. Nope, not that easy. Not that easy. And there are 29 examples every year of how uneasy it is. And it takes one where it is an extreme championship favorite. And 100% the Clippers were the extreme championship favorite round game 2 of the first round, where after the Lakers lost that first game to Portland, I mean, we just saw massive line changes. And for good reason, because I still think LA is the Lakers, the one LA team, is flawed. But they get Denver now. Massive favorite, holds themselves with an arrogance that they've already won, tries to skip the hard part, and this is what they get. This is the comeuppance. That is a great lesson to everyone. The regular season matters. You have to build chemistry. You will play in the playoffs as you more or less play in the regular season. Doesn't mean every day. Doesn't mean you got to go hard all 82, but you got to put it together for more than, a week like they did in January. You got to do it for more than a week. And you can't just flip the switch the way that the Warriors have the last couple of years because the Warriors won championships before that. And they absolutely roasted teams with Kevin Durant. Not only that, they had won a championship and gone to 2 finals before Kevin Durant showed up. So they had earned the right the last 2 years in a way, a twisted way. If anyone had earned the right to sort of coast and decide when they wanted to flip the switch or not, it was the team that had absolutely dominated the competition for prior years. The Clippers had done squat. They're historically the worst franchise in basketball that's older than the Memphis Grizzlies. They're a laughing stock historically, and they thought that they could just waltz into a title. No, it's just not how it works. That's a great lesson because honestly, the narrative around the NBA, and I hate that word because it usually is just this catch-all for a thing one guy said that you want to make into a bigger deal. But the narrative around the NBA was very simple. Regular season doesn't matter. And if you have the talent, you're just going to win it. So these playoff series don't matter at all. The Denver Nuggets have a ton of talent. Don't get me wrong. But the Clippers tried to take the easy way, and it was a great lesson to everybody, fans, the NBA, and especially teams. Hey, it's just not that easy. It's just not that easy.
And I think the other lesson here too is that chemistry matters, right? And a lot of people viewed this Clippers team as okay. Kawhi Leonard and now Paul George are entering this ready-made playoff team with a foundation set. We only had a 1-season sample size of last year's Clippers, but that was a team that was haphazardly put together. This is a team that has 3 players on the roster who have played together for at least 3 seasons, where the Nuggets have 8 players who have played together with for at least 3 seasons. That stuff matters, especially when you talk about your stars in Denver's case, Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray have an incredible chemistry, a two-man game together. While Kawhi Leonard and Paul George don't make each other better. That's more of a my turn, your turn thing. Very reminiscent of like LeBron and Dwayne Wade that first year in Miami. And we saw how that worked out for the Heat that first year. They end up losing to an organically built team like the Dallas Mavericks in 2011. And I think the winner of these playoffs so far has been chemistry. Boston built organically. Miami built organically. The team, even that Denver is about to play the Lakers, at least LeBron James was there for a year. He's got relationships with those players, that's a veteran-laden team and stuff like that. Not a ton of chemistry there, but
to the rule. Always the exemption to
that's
the
a
rule.
great
But
point.
even so, you can make that point. The point I wanted to make after it is the Clippers didn't do it the hard way. I've said that enough times now. You get that point. But you know, Sam Esfandiari of the Light Years podcast loves to do this love of the game, love of the fame sort of a thing. And the Clippers were a chief love of the fame thing. They loved being the favorites. They couldn't stop talking about how happy they were the favorites. They gave everybody the indication that after it, they pulled everything back. Quotes are forever, man. You got covered all year long in a way that you've never been covered before. And you said a lot of stuff that you didn't back up. And listen, that's the way that life goes a lot of times. I have no problem. Keep talking. Keep doing your thing. If that's the way you motivate yourself, go ahead. You need to motivate yourself better than whatever the hell you just did, though. So all of these quotes are forever. All of them stick around, and they were hyping themselves up. They were saying that they were the favorites. Lou Williams out here, or Patrick Beverley, I'm sorry. You can't have both of those guys on the same team, by the way. Patrick Beverley out here saying we should never lose a game. Well, yeah, that's a nice thought, but not the way that you said it. That's a thing that even the Memphis Grizzlies, not to pound on the Memphis Grizzlies, that's a thing that even, the Charlotte Hornets say, oh, yeah, we should win every game. We love our talent, this and that. But they believed it. They believed that they should go 82-0 and that they should go 16-0 in the playoffs. It's just not how it works. And the lack of humility absolutely burned them. Absolutely burned them. And it's a credit to prior championship teams who knew how hard it was, or when they were going on their first realm, didn't go like, oh, this is going to be so easy. We're so much more talented. Yes, Kawhi Leonard is incredible. No one's arguing that he's not an incredible player. But just adding Kawhi Leonard to the mix doesn't do it. The Raptors had an incredible base around him. Yeah. And then they needed him. Don't get me wrong. They needed Kawhi Leonard to win that title. But they had a foundation. And when he wasn't himself in the final few games of those finals, everyone else was able to lift him up to the way that he was able to lift them up in the prior rounds when they didn't know what the hell they were doing. And he said, give me the damn ball. That worked. That was a situation that worked. And that was a team that had no hubris whatsoever. That was a team that was just happy to be there and played hard the same way the Denver Nuggets did. Chemistry matters a ton, and that all comes from leadership. And I just remember the first Warriors championship run, how they just thought, like, listen, we're just going to keep our mouth shut because everyone says we can't do it. Let's prove them. Even Draymond is like, listen, we're not saying that we're not going to do it. We're better than you're giving us credit for, but we're also not going to tell you that we're, changing the game or anything like that. That stuff started to creep in a little bit the next year. But what did they do? They go and win 73 games. That tells you a lot. They wanted to prove something.
That's the difference, right? Is that the Warriors went out and earned the number one seed every year, right?
100%.
Where the Clippers were doing this load just like this was a win for team chemistry, this playoffs has been a loss for load management, right? And we thought that the last postseason was a win for load management, but not so much, right? Like this Clippers team in their first year of existing in this way, load managed this regular season, so never really had 82 games is enough time to build the chemistry necessary enough to go ahead and win the NBA Finals. But
even with the 70 that they ended up playing,
and they punted on it. They said, you know what, we're good enough, and there was a sense 100%. Of entitlement with this Clippers team that I don't think a lot of people expected, because like you said, they kind of had this brand last year of, hey, we work hard with the black top team, this is what we do, to this year where they became more Hollywood than even the Lakers somehow. The Lakers were the team that did the work this year, and they're in the conference finals and the Clippers aren't.
I mean, the Lakers too, obviously when you look at the Eastern Conference, those are two teams where culture and chemistry matter a lot. You can't even argue it. Yes, both of them brought in big-time free agents this past year in Jimmy Butler and Kemba Walker. Nobody is looking at those two and saying, look at those big shots. Look at those guys who think they're bigger than they are. Even Jimmy Butler, who, listen, no one loves Jimmy Butler more than Jimmy Butler. No one questions that dude puts in work. I mean, that's his entire brand. He is a happy-go-lucky workaholic, kind of a crazy person. That's why him and Thibodeau got along so well. But even the Lakers, man, and the Lakers are the definitive franchise for flash, but they also have the substance. And you could say, yeah, well, they have LeBron, and LeBron loves himself some LeBron, and it's always going to be about a thing. And if they go down 1-0, the clutch media machine will kick into gear and all this stuff. There's a lot of extracurricular stuff that naturally comes with the Lakers, that naturally comes with LeBron, and even Anthony Davis, who obviously did what he did to get to the Lakers in the first place. But the rest of this Lakers team does deserve some credit because they've really grinded it out. They're, facilitating for LeBron in a way that hasn't always been natural for some of those guys and for the teams around LeBron. We've seen that enough times with the Cavs. Some of these guys just aren't cut out for the role of being in the superstar shadow. And beyond that, you got a guy like Alex Caruso who skipped his sister's wedding to stay in the bubble to play.
Right.
Like, there's some grit to that team.
Yeah.
Frank Vogel team.
Well, Lou Williams left the bubble for lemon pepper wings. Alex Caruso is staying in the bubble and missing his sister's wedding. I mean, that's a great point.
So I'll give the Lakers credit in this regard, and certainly the Denver Nuggets, a grit and grind team, if there ever was one, with their chunky center and having to go down 3-1 in both of these series. Like, all four of these teams that exist are good for the, again, narrative that you got to earn it, that it is tough, that this is difficult. And it is a challenge. And the Warriors really did screw it up for the last 4 or 5 years when it just looked so easy when they had Kevin Durant. But the buy-in, and two, the buy-in that you had to get from Clay and Draymond, maybe not so much Draymond, but Clay in particular Steph, was massive. To make Kevin Durant fit the way that he fit so fast, I mean, it took the Miami Heat a year. And once it clicked, it was spectacular. Don't get me wrong. But it took them a full calendar year and a kick in the teeth. Kevin Durant took 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that speaks to Steph. And then, obviously, the entire culture revolves around Steph. And we've talked about this ad nauseum, Steph being the little Tim Duncan and just things working around him. The Warriors, if you didn't already feel good about their position moving forward, you have to feel good about it now. The Clippers are a cesspool culturally. You're seeing the old guard and now the new guard completely clashing. That manifested on the court without a doubt, where, no one trusted each other out there. And then you also had the staggering of Kawhi and Paul George, as you mentioned prior. They looked like a team that didn't know how to win, that they could win. Don't get me wrong. They had enough talent to just easily win most of their games. But when the going got tough, they had no idea how to win. That's something that I don't think is going to go away. You can't just fix that overnight because, again, this is something that's very deep-seated. This old regime with the Clippers thought that they had something organic and special and unique, and they thought that they could push it with maybe just a Kawhi. And Kawhi goes, I don't really like these guys. Bring me also Paul George and sacrifice everything in the future. And the Clippers did the right thing in saying, yeah, okay, we're going to do that. Let's go for it. But, it doesn't matter.
You do that. I mean, if you're a front office, you do that 100 times out of 100. You make that deal. But now it's looking precarious for the Clippers because they have one more year of Kawhi and Paul George. Both of them could be free agents in 2021. So next year is really, for them, championship or bust because Kawhi went to Toronto and won a championship in 1 out of 1 years. But I want to go back to this Warriors point because I think this is very important.
Yeah.
They do have that organizational fortitude, that chemistry that is built organically, which is kind of strange to think about because they were the team that took the easy route in getting Kevin Durant, right? We're talking about national narratives here.
Yeah.
And it's not untrue, but it's
unquestionable. I mean, if someone offers you the easy route, you take it. Like,
if Kevin Durant says, I want to sign with you and you have the cap space and you said, that sounds great.
We really like being what we are. We won't take one of the 10 greatest scorers of all time, maybe the greatest scorer of all time. We're just not interested.
Right.
Even though, we just lost the finals and could certainly use a player of like a wing.
And Durant, and with Durant, they win the finals and all these things. And now that Durant is gone, you are back to that organically grown trio of Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green. And by the way, and you've got Kevon Looney there, who's been there for now 4 or 5 years. You've got
culture guy.
You've got guys now. Like the Warriors are going to go into next season, I believe, with 5 guys who have been on the team for 3 or more years. It's going to be the core 3: Kevon Looney and Damian Lee. That is really that stacks up well in the Western Conference. It's behind only, I believe, Denver and Utah. But then you compare the Warriors' top guys to Denver's top guys and Utah's top guys, and I think the Warriors guys are better. You could argue now, depending on what Klay Thompson looks like coming from injury, what Draymond Green looks like a year older, and what Jamal Murray looks like a year after this for Denver. I mean, this is a breakout postseason for him. And Nikola Jokic, by the way, is a top 7 player in the NBA right now. I mean, he's unbelievable. And young, he's only going to get better. But still, Utah's, they've got Rudy Gobert, who has limitations in the playoffs, as we've seen. Donovan Mitchell.
We don't need to talk about Utah. I know they gave Denver 7, but Utah's not. Utah's not. You
stack up what the Warriors have and their top core guys, and it is very reminiscent of what the Spurs had with Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, and Tim Duncan for a 20-year period, basically. And the Warriors have that now. And if chemistry won out in these playoffs, that bodes well for the Warriors next year in a very meaningful way.
Two points I want to make on that. We mentioned the chemistry of the Clippers, and they only have 1 year of this left. We shouldn't underestimate that Kawhi has limitations, and only certain places will make concessions to those limitations. Right? Like Kawhi needs to be load managed. As much as we say that this is, he's just doing it. He's doing it for a reason. And there are only so many places that will allow that to happen. And those are desperate places, if we're being totally honest. Or places that are so above and beyond successful that they're probably not going to give up all that much for a Kawhi Leonard. And they probably don't have the room to sign him. So the Warriors would be like, absolutely, Kawhi, come on in. How do they make that happen? It's probably impossible. There are a lot of other teams like that the same way, like the Lakers or even Houston. They can't maneuver. They already have their dudes. So they're not bringing in Kawhi Leonard because they already have their dudes. So they could say, okay, Kawhi, you can play half a season. Or you're a desperate team, the Toronto Raptors. Desperate team. Do whatever you need to do. Just get us over the hump. And Lord, did he do that? He did more than that. And then also the LA Clippers, who are desperate to win over the LA market in whatever way. And they went all in. They went all in on this year. People are not going to forget this fraudulent nature. You cannot talk yourself up the way that the entire franchise. I mean, we're talking players, coaches, administration. It doesn't matter how many Lee Jenkins you have on staff. Your culture cannot be good enough to where you can talk it before you walk it. And people remember that kind of stuff when you're competing with the Lakers, who, by the way, are in the Western Conference Finals. The entire season was building up for a Western Conference Finals, Lakers, Clippers. One of them didn't show up. Guess what? You just lost LA for another 5 years. People just don't forget that kind of stuff. They just don't. And maybe I'm putting too much stock in all of it, but you better be not this time next year, but this juncture of the season next year, it better be Lakers Clippers, because if you don't show up again, then it's over. Then it's over. It doesn't matter. People are going to be like, well, 2 of the last 3 years, even if you do it a third, 2 of the last 3 years, who beat you?
And it's going to be harder for them next year because the Warriors are going to be back in the mix. What we were just talking about. Denver's only going to be better than they are now. We'll see what happens with teams like Houston and Oklahoma City and Utah and whatever, but the Western Conference is going to be tough next year. And if the Clippers thought that they could walk into the conference finals now, it's going to be even harder next year. And like you said, they absolutely have to do it next year. It is NBA finals or bust for the Clippers.
It was already NBA finals or bust. So now you've already busted, and you better win your money back before your wife finds out you can't pay the mortgage. So
that's right.
It's a real issue. And going off of your point about the Warriors chemistry, what does it say that they traded D'Angelo Russell?
Right, and you get a guy
that thinks and cares about that kind of stuff.
That's absolutely right. And you get a guy in Andrew Wiggins who is a quiet type. You don't need your rah-rah leader.
Anybody's stuff.
No.
Sorry for the language, but there's Andrew Wiggins is not in any. Andrew Wiggins has no pretense whatsoever.
He's looking forward to. Oh, you just need me to cut and shoot open threes and play some defense. Fine, I'll do that. Yeah. You don't need me to be Maple Jordan anymore. That sounds amazing. The Warriors they traded D'Angelo Russell for Andrew Wiggins as much as the positional fit for the emotional fit. I mean, they really did. You look at what you talked about with Steph Curry being mini Tim Duncan is absolutely right. You look at they're just unassuming guys in Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. You bring in a similar sort of personality like Andrew Wiggins. You've got Draymond Green. Most teams need more than one Draymond Green or one rah-rah guy. But because the Warriors have Draymond Green, they have enough rah-rah. That is like you've hit the rah-rah limit with that. So they're good. And by the way, Steve Kerr, don't underestimate his rah-rah ability. Steve Kerr is much more similar to Draymond Green than he is to Steph Curry. Let's get that straight. If they need a pep talk, Steve Kerr is there for it. And like he breaks clipboards when he needs to break clipboards. Yeah. He is. And look, you might need to add more of those guys. I think Marquise Chris is certainly one of those guys. Like you need those guys spotted on the roster, but your core guys, boys, the chemistry going to be so important for them next year. And we've got a mini camp coming up, and they're going to presumably be able to build more of that chemistry after 6 months off, and that's going to be really important for them too.
Let's talk about that mini camp, which is starting up officially, unofficially on Monday in San Francisco. Just run us through what is expected out of this. Who do you think actually shows up, and whomever is there, what are they going to be doing?
So this is a 2-week program. It's all going to be local at the Chase Center. The Warriors are going to have a team hotel. It's going to be mini bubble, right? It's going to be a one-team bubble for the Warriors. And Monday is the reporting process, right? Players report to Chase Center. They get tested for the coronavirus, all these things, and then they enter into a 2-day quarantine, right? And they're going to stay at the hotel for 2 days, and then by Wednesday, they'll be doing group voluntary workouts, and then that'll last until the following Friday. So I think and we don't know yet who's going to show up. We won't know until they actually do show up, right? I think certainly guys like Paschall and Jordan Poole and Damian Lee and like these role player types, Marquise Chris, they're going to be there. They're going to show up. I think when you really get into questions is, does Klay Thompson want to come up from Southern California to Northern California to participate? Does Draymond Green want to leave his responsibilities with TNT during this playoff broadcast to show up for a 2-week bubble? Can he even do it based on whatever kind of contract he signed with them? Steph Curry, does he want to leave his family for 2 weeks? I mean, because he's got to be quarantined from them for 2 weeks. I mean, that's a thing that he needs to think about, right? That's a thing that he needs to weigh. Mm-hmm. And so we won't know until Monday who shows up. The Warriors throughout this entire process have pushed for exactly this. I think they've been hopeful that everybody would show up, including the top 3 guys. Andrew Wiggins is back in market. I know that, and he probably will be there next week. And that could provide him with a very important opportunity to play with guys like Steph, Klay, and Draymond, which he hasn't even played 30 minutes with Steph Curry. He's played, I think, only 72 minutes total with Draymond Green, has obviously played no minutes with Klay Thompson, which means he's played no minutes with the core trio that he's now going to be a part of, turning into a core 4 here. So if everybody shows up, this could be very meaningful for the Warriors because you're going from March to now from playing basketball. That's 6 months. But if these guys don't play again until the beginning of next season, whenever that is, that could be a whole year without playing basketball. It's already been more than a year since Steph, Draymond, and Klay Thompson have played together, right? That's been until last June.
I want to know what you're hearing on this. I mean, it sounds like early January. The date that I had heard was like the 5th, but it would make way more sense to just start on MLK Day. It just feels like an easy PR win for the NBA. But it seems like Christmas is off the table at this juncture from what I'm hearing. And listen, all this stuff is very fluid, and my sources are not infallible.
No, I'm hearing the same thing. I think the estimate that I keep hearing is late January, early February. You're just like, hey, you know what? Let's punt on 2020. Let's get through the holidays, all these things. Give these players a honestly deserved offseason and a deserved holiday break. And let's just get back to training camp right around, early January. Maybe it's January 1st, January 5th, whatever. And then you get, a 2-week training camp, and then you start the season late January, early February.
What they had a lockout in 2011 that led to a 66-game regular season. I think it would be closer to the 1998-99 NBA lockout, which brought about a 50-game regular season, which that was until late January. So that lockout ended on January 20th, 1999. I have Wikipedia open. If you remember, that was also the year that the Knicks, as an 8 seed, I believe, went to the finals. So
they beat the Heat, in the final, in the playoffs there.
Very sorry about that, Wes.
I remember that.
Let me just put first off, 50 regular season games. It'd be stunning if they were able to get that in, just given the fact that they pushed it a little bit. February 5 to May 5 for the regular season, May 8th to June 11th for the playoffs, the finals from June. So they got it all in there. Now it's 29 teams, 50 games. Sorry, we're doing this on the fly here. But 50 might be strong. 41 game season, literal half of the
there's ways you can figure this out. I mean, you can instead of the Golden State Warriors going to Portland twice a year on separate games, you just knock out both Portland games in one trip, right? So you're eliminating travel and you're eliminating travel days. These things. So there's ways that you could sort of get around this. Like you just play every team in a series, so like a home series, and then Portland would come to San Francisco for 3 days and play 2 games in that 3 day span or whatever it would be. There's ways to get around it. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's a lot more back-to-backs. Maybe it's a very shortened season between 40 or 50 games or something. But they're going to have to get on track at some point because I have never bought into the fact that the NBA is just going to change their entire calendar year. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think that they have this calendar year the way they like it. I don't think they want to start in December going forward because you're basically, for example, if you start the season on Christmas, which has been an idea floated, just start the season on Christmas, you're losing 2 products. You're because right now the NBA has opening night in late October, and then they have the Christmas Day showcase. Well, if you just take opening night and put it on Christmas Day, you've now taken 2 products and made it into one. You're cannibalizing your own product. That has never made sense for me. I know Adam Silver is a business savvy guy, doesn't think that way either. So that never made sense to me. I think what they're going to try to do is you sort of truncate this next coming season, do it however you can, whether it's played in pods, bubbles, shortened season, whatever it looks like, and then you just try to get back to a regular calendar year.
I think that's the way to do it. Who's the most important person to show up at training camp? If anyone could show up, who needs to be there? I think you're going to say Steph, but
yeah.
Is there anybody else that comes to mind when I ask that question?
I mean, look, Steph is the obvious answer, but I would argue that it's Klay Thompson because I think if you're the Warriors, you want to see not only what that knee looks like, but what does his conditioning look like, right? Because these guys haven't played, man. And Klay Thompson's been shooting around the 3-point arc for the last several months, but that doesn't mean he's in any sort of condition. I think Klay Thompson's the guy that they need to see because Steve Kerr has been in San Diego for most of this offseason. You would think that he's seen – actually, I know he's seen Klay Thompson in person at least once. There's people within the Warriors organization who've seen Klay Thompson in person, but not everybody in the Warriors organization. You'd like to see Klay, who spent most of the season away from the Warriors in Southern California rehabbing, just getting to know guys like Eric Paschall and Jordan Poole. He'd be like, those guys have been around for a year. They must have a relationship with Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson is as familiar to them as he is to people listening to this podcast right now and watching this on YouTube. So I don't think that – I think that introducing Klay to this team when chemistry is so important the way it is right now in the league – and the coaching staff and front office getting to see what it is that he looks like, what his conditioning is, and how that knee is coming along. That's probably the most important guy who could show up.
All right, let's talk about the guy that you wrote about a little bit earlier this week. I thought it would come out today. It came out yesterday?
Wednesday, I think. Yeah.
Yesterday. Wednesday, which is yesterday, 6 a.m. published. Hey, about it on the Mercury News. Deni Avdija. I'm pronouncing that correct?
Nope.
Okay.
Deni Avdija.
Say it. Avdija.
Strong E.
Deni
Avdija. Yeah.
Avdija. There is no E in the name.
No.
Just tell me about him. Why should he be the pick at number 2?
I think you and I have talked about this before, just as general as what I think of Deni as a prospect. But you look at the consensus top 3 guys in this draft, and they're all flawed, but they all have high ceilings. And I just don't know why Deni isn't really considered one of these top 4. I don't know why it's a top 4 consensus with Deni being there, because you got your guard, you got your point guard, you got your shooting guard, and you got your center, but you really don't have your forward in that consensus group. I think Deni ought to be the forward that's in that consensus group. He's got tremendous basketball feel on par with a guy like LaMelo Ball, like truly. But he also has size at 6'9", 225 pounds or something like that. He's got incredible strength, incredible passing ability, and all these things. But he's also proven. He's productive. He was the MVP of the Israeli League this last year. He won a championship with Maccabi Tel Aviv. Like, you like that stuff, especially for the Warriors. The Warriors, if you look at their draft history, have favored production. He has gotten production in his past career. He's been a professional since he was 16 years old. So, when you look at him and you look at his ball skills, the way he can pass the ball, the way he can get to the rim. He plays well in transition, but he plays really well in the half court. He can run pick and roll, and he can do all these things. I think you take that and you look at what the Warriors, as far as what they need as a team, they need guys who can move the ball. They need guys who have size and strength. They need guys who could specifically fill in minutes on the wing. Deni Avdija is all of those things. The big question mark with him is the outside shot. The guy is a 50% something shooter from the free throw line for his career. He's shot, in the low or the high 20s, low 30s from three-point range throughout his career. So you wonder, can that shot translate to the NBA level? Guys who go through their careers 50%, jumping to like a 70 or 80% free throw shooter. And so that to me is the big logically it's a very real question. Every time I watch him play with the guy, I mean, he just knows what to be on the court. He makes stuff happen, and I'm buying in. And I know the Warriors, specifically Bob Myers, has seen him play in person, and I think that can be really important, especially when you're not going to have this draft combine the way they thought. And so I think he's really he's very much a possibility for the Warriors at number 2 if Anthony Edwards is off the board.
Would that be somebody who they could trade down and still get? And if so, what would be the range in your estimation?
They could. I think you could trade down maybe to 4 or 5. But I think the Warriors would be very comfortable just going ahead. If he's there at number 2 and Anthony Edwards was taken number 1, I don't think that they would trade down. I think they would just go ahead and take him.
How does he fit in with the current roster as constructed? And what kind of a role could you see him having in year 1, which is still a championship window team?
He would come off the bench, I think, in an Andre Iguodala type role. I mean, you think about what Iguodala brought to that team. Yeah, he brought this elite genius-level defense, no doubt. And Deni would be far from that as a 19-year-old who has defensive issues, concerns, right, going into the NBA. But as far as a long, 6'9", rangy guy who can finish with explosiveness at the rim and then, get guys involved with his playmaking, I think you could see him filling in as the new Andre Iguodala. Also, he'd be able to, at that size and at that position, unlock certain small ball lineups for the Warriors. I mean, you could easily play him at the 4 or Andrew Wiggins at the 4. It doesn't really matter. You could play Steph, Clay, Wiggins, Deni, and Draymond Green at center, and that's a good lineup right there. And then I think with Deni, he gives you opportunities to facilitate out of the post and do all these other things that the Warriors like to do. So I think like his way of playing, he likes to get up tempo, but he can still function in the half court. He's a great passer at his position, great size, which is something the Warriors need. They like guys now who complement guys like Steph and Clay and Draymond, guys who can barrel their ways to the rim and provide levels of strength and athleticism that, Steph and Clay just don't really have. They're not that kind of athlete. I think you said it last week, like Steph is a yoga athlete or something like that. I really like that. But he's not like he's not a strength guy. Deni is. And so you could see him fitting in really easily with that top 4.
The downside being what you've explained already in the fact that he can't shoot. How big of an issue could that really be, though, if you're trying to play him alongside Draymond Green, which in theory is something that he would absolutely have to do, given that, he's the number 2 overall pick.
Right.
Obviously, year 1 would be a journey. You say that there's not a lot of precedent, and you're correct. Not a lot of precedent on guys being that poor of shooters initially, turning into good shooters. What gives you optimism, if there is any, that he could turn into a good shooter?
Blind hope and confidence, mostly. He's one of these guys where you watch interviews with him and you watch him play and you're like, I'm just all in on this guy. And I know there's no precedent, but we see things happen without precedent all the time. It's sort of like this big, like, oh, this has never happened. But then stuff happens that has never happened every year, every season in the NBA. So I don't know now. I really don't know. But really what you have to do is compare this to the rest of the draft. LaMelo Ball is extremely flawed. Talk about a guy who can't shoot. He can't even score. At least Deni can score at the rim. LaMelo Ball doesn't even have that. James Wiseman, there's major question marks as far as just his sample size and development. And does a player like him exist in today's NBA? I think that's a real thing. Now, I'll say this again. If Anthony Edwards is on the board, he's the better pick. But if he goes number 1 to Minnesota or whoever ends up with the number 1 pick, I think Deni is as good an option as there is. He's not He's not a perfect prospect. Now, I would actually put Deni number 2 on my board if I were the Warriors, and then maybe like a guy like Tyrese Halliburton at number 3. And these are all guys who have production, who have a proven track record, and I think could make an immediate impact right away.
One guy who did make an immediate impact right away for the Warriors this past season, to whatever degree that impact mattered is up for debate. They won 15 games, was Eric Paschall, who made the All-NBA rookie first team as expected. Paschall, it seems to me to be a very high floor, low ceiling kind of player, a guy who probably doesn't have that much room to grow beyond what he already has shown at the NBA level, which is certainly capable of keeping him in the NBA for half a decade or maybe even a decade if I'm wrong about the ceiling thing. But he's going to be a nice role player or a spot starter for teams because he's smart, he's athletic enough, he's big enough to really provide quality at the 4 and can slide up to a 5 in a pinch. But I wanted to get your thoughts on Paschall's rookie season and I guess more specifically where you see it going from here as the Warriors, try to integrate him and the other young guys on this team into becoming championship contenders, because that is going to be a transition for this team. They sucked last year. And while, the expectation is, hey, culture and this and that, like you still have to teach these guys how to win, which is an important part of it. I'm not saying they can't do it. I'm not saying that it will be easy, but man, like that's still a process of teaching these guys how to win. Eric Paschall certainly won a lot in college. Where do you think we go from here with Paschall and kind of in the bigger picture, the Warriors moving forward?
Yeah, look, Eric Paschall is going to get an opportunity to be part of the closing 5, right? I talked to Bob Myers in July, and he pencils in Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and Andrew Wiggins into that closing group, as anybody would. But Paschall's going to get an opportunity. I think the organization is with Paschall, their confidence in him, because they're going to have the traded player exception to bring in a high-quality player if they want to use that way. They're going to have, obviously, the number 2 pick in the draft. It's going to be a high-quality player who's going to deserve time on the floor just because he's the number 2 pick. They're going to be able to sign free agents. They're going to have the mid-level exception. Like, they're going to have a lot of ways to add guys to this team, and yet Bob Myers is still saying Paschall is going to have as much an opportunity as anybody to be part of this closing group. The real question mark is, can he shoot the 3? Because you referenced this with Deni. If you've got Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins on the floor, you've got 2 non-floor spacers on the court. Andrew Wiggins can pressure the rim, but he's not scaring anybody from three-point range right now. Draymond Green is the same way. You've got to have that other guy be a floor spacer, even though you've got Steph and Klay on the floor. And Eric Paschall, talking with reporters earlier this week, acknowledged that. And again, I talked with Paschall in July, and I asked him, what are you working on this offseason? He said 3-point shooting, period. That's the only thing he's working on. He understands how big of a priority it is. The Warriors do too. They have tasked him with, hey, you need to be better than 28% from three-point range. He knows he needs to get to about 35% to be a real factor. And if he's just doing it from the corners, that's fine. But that's going to be the big part of him. With the Warriors going forward, that's the big question. Who is your closing 5? Paschall's going to be in the mix possibly. I think that they do Paschall team. They spent the whole season rebuilding. I think you look at him, you look at guys like Damian Lee. Those are the guys you could probably pencil into being in the rotation. Marquise Chris, he's got the inside track of being your starting center next year. That's really it off the top of my head. Jordan Poole, we'll see. It depends on what they do in this offseason. You look at guys like him and Michael Mulder and some of these other guys, but for sure, I think you can come out of this 15-50 season saying, hey, we've got Eric Paschall, Damian Lee, Marquise Chris. Those are 3 guys who are going to be part of our rotation going forward. And as far as Paschall is concerned, could end up being one of the core 5 guys moving forward.
With Paschall, I imagine that the prototype would be a PJ Tucker. That's the goal here, turn him into the Warriors version of PJ Tucker.
Yeah, I think that's fair. They might want. I mean, look, PJ Tucker is a. No, it's possible. Absolutely. Paschall is really strong. I think he's more athletic than PJ Tucker is. Like, he could just be like a more athletic version of PJ Tucker. I think that would be fair, because PJ Tucker could also like switch onto the perimeter. He could pick up a shooting guard in a pinch. I think that's what they would expect from Paschall, is his ability to guard probably 3 positions on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. What could knock him off? What could be the thing? Because again, he's a high floor guy.
Yeah.
What would be the worst case scenario for an Eric Paschall next year? Because if he doesn't progress, I still think he's good enough. Like, so.
Well, the other big question with him is whether or not he could be a playmaker. Because last year he was the offense, and that's like cool. Like, you deserve first team rookie honors for taking on that responsibility, especially as the 41st pick in the draft, right? But next year, it's not going to be the case. He's going to have Steph and Clay and Draymond around him for the entire year, presumably, as long as they're healthy. Andrew Wiggins, too. And he's not going to get the ball in his hands that much. And there's a reason why the coaching staff asked him toward the end of the season, hey, we need you to kick out more. We need you to drive and kick. We need you to play make a little bit more. You can't just be this black hole on offense that you've been. You can't take 8 dribbles of possession when we give you the ball. You've got to move the ball. And whether or not he can exist within the ecosystem that Steve Kerr has created on offense, to me, is the big question. The 3-point shot is the easy, like, Band-Aid solution to that, right? If you can shoot threes, then we're just not going to give you the ball until you're open in the corner. But you want more from a guy, right? And if he can be this playmaker who can also stretch the floor and get to the rim and attack closeouts and do all these things, well, then you've really got something. And then you've really got a guy who could be part of this closing 5 group, right? And you could play him with Draymond in that front court. The worst case, I think, is that he's basically your second unit scorer. He just sort of does what he did as a starter this last year for the Warriors. When Steph and Clay are off the floor, let's just give the ball to Paschall. Hopefully he creates, he goes out and scores 6, 8, 10 points, in a matter of 10 minutes, and he just sort of floats our bench while our main guys are getting rest.
If he's the guy who has to do that, then the Warriors are in deep do probably for next year. He's a good role player. That's a role that's probably a bit too much for him, but it will be very interesting to see, particularly with the draft, the mid-level exceptions, the trade exemption. They have a lot of mechanisms at their disposal to improve this team. And if Eric Paschall is the 8th or 9th best player on your team, you got a squad. If he's the 2nd or 3rd, as he was this past year, I guess 4th, maybe 5th, I don't know. It depends. They weren't healthy enough. Then you have a problem. So he is kind of the bellwether here. He is the kind of guy who you look at and you say, okay, where does he fit in? And if he doesn't have to do much, if he can have low expectations, but, overproduce against those expectations, again, now you have something really cooking. We're going to have real basketball, real Golden State Warriors basketball cooking next week. Wes Goldberg, I presume, will be there whenever these guys get out of quarantine to whatever degree we can get in there, which is probably non-existent. They're not going to let us in there ever again, are they?
No. It'll all be Zoom.
To be handled.
It'll all be Zoom.
Well,
yeah.
We'll talk to some people. Who's the prospect that you're eyeing up for next week?
So I was gonna do LaMelo Ball this week. I ended up doing Deni because certain things came together as far as reporting. I'm hoping I'll have LaMelo Ball to talk about next week.
That will be.
I'll tell you, whoever's listening. I'm trying to get Andrew Bogut to talk to him. I've reached out to Andrew Bogut. I need him to return my emails. Yeah. That'll be fun, I think, for Warriors fans too, because Bogut played in the NBL against LaMelo Ball. It'll be interesting to get his perspective on him.
That'd be absolutely fantastic. Hopefully that comes to fruition. If nothing else, there'll be plenty to talk about because LaMelo Ball, he's a conversation driver. He seems to have a sort of hold on people. Wonder what that's all about. Wes, you have a hold on me this entire conversation. Appreciate you taking the time, man. We'll do it again next week.